I'm sure that many people watching this will have never heard of Gram Parsons, and if you have, I'm sure that you've heard the crazy story of his death. Gram didn't live a long time, but his short life is full of stories that could be a feature-length Hollywood movie. The connections he made has allowed him to be cemented in music history and hold a place in the heart of music lovers everywhere. So before we dive into his death, I want to talk more about his life and what led to that point. Gram was born Ingram Cecil Connor III on November 5th, 1946 in Winter Haven, Florida. He was born into an incredibly wealthy family on his mother's side. His mother's name was Avis Snively, and she was the heiress to the Snively Orange Canning Company, which her father had started in Florida. Gram's father, who was called Coondog by his friends, was a celebrated World War II flying ace who was present at the Battle of Pearl Harbor. Gram started his adventure in music after seeing Elvis live in concert in the 1950s. I believe he was probably about 10, maybe 12. Gram had a little sister. Her name was also Avis, and they would perform for their family, their parents, friends, and Gram was usually the one who was in charge of all of that. So he was very passionate about his music. His life was pretty normal up until he turned 12. In 1958, a few days before Christmas, his father would unfortunately take his own life. This would cause Gram's mother to spiral into alcoholism, and she would soon get remarried to a man named Robert Parsons, which is how Gram Parsons got his last name, because he adopted Gram and his little sister, Avis. As Gram got older, he would perform in bands in high school, different small bands around town. His stepfather actually bought him a club to perform in called the Dairy Down, which, interestingly enough, it has been restored and you can go and visit it. It's in Winter Haven, Florida. I was very close to going to see it, but I haven't been able to see it yet. It's a music venue now, and it has live shows, and I think they have open mic nights too, which is really cool. Anyway, he had a couple of big opportunities. The one that really stands out while he was in high school was he had the opportunity to play at the 1964 World's Fair in New York. While Gram was having success in local music, his mom's alcoholism was increasing, and this was because her husband was having an affair. She would drink so much that she would spend days in her room, and she was not the normal person that people knew her to be. Unfortunately, the day that Gram graduated high school, his mother would pass away from cirrhosis of the liver from her heavy drinking. Personally, in my opinion, I think the events of losing his mom and his dad are what caused Gram to spiral. He partook in alcohol when he was younger, which is, it's pretty normal for teenagers to do that. But as he got older, he upgraded to much harder substances, but that's something we'll talk about later. When he graduated high school, he attended Harvard for one semester before he dropped out. Around this time, he actually met Brandon DeWilde. He was an Academy Award nominated child actor. Brandon was able to help Gram get a recording contract, which led to the founding of Gram's band, the International Submarine Band. They got their name from a sketch that was on The Little Rascals. The International Submarine Band was not successful. They recorded one album called Safe at Home, and it was a commercial flop. I think the music's really good, but for some reason it didn't hit the charts. While the band was together, they did have an impressive gig. This is when they were in the movie called The Trip. This movie starred Peter Fonda, who is Jane Fonda's brother. He was also in the movie Easy Rider, if you've ever heard of that. The movie was also written by Jack Nicholson, who most people would know for playing Jack Torrance in The Shining. So I think that's a cool tidbit. I don't think they were credited in the movie, but there are clips of it on YouTube. When the band's album, Safe at Home, was released, it was actually after the band had already broken up, and that was in 1968. The band broke up because Gram had taken a trip to California and he loved it so much out there that he decided to stay, but the rest of the band didn't want to follow him. From a career standpoint, this was a good move for him because he met Chris Hillman, who was one of the main musicians in the Byrds. The Byrds were an incredibly successful band in the 1960s with hits like Turn, 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 and a cover of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man. They have a lot of really good music. I really like the Byrds a lot. When Parsons joined the band, there had been an idea to create an album that would include songs from a lot of different genres combined into one. It was supposed to serve as a timeline of American music history. But, unfortunately, this did not work out. They did, however, create one of the first country rock albums ever. So they did combine a couple of genres. This album would be called Sweetheart of the Rodeo. Honestly, I could probably do a video just about this album and everything that happened around it, because there's some drama and stuff, but that's a story for another day. Ultimately, this album was a flop, commercially, and also due to some legal issues. Gram's contribution to the album was virtually erased. He was still contractually under the management of his previous band. Sweetheart of the Rodeo was released after Gram had already left the Byrds. The reason why he left the Byrds is because he had met Mick Jagger and Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, and they were talking about the Byrds' upcoming world tour. One of the stops on the tour was to be in South Africa, which at the time was under the apartheid rule, which is super racist, and it segregated the black and white people of South Africa at the time. So when Gram learnt about this, the apartheid, and how they were going to stop in South Africa and perform, he decided as a form of protest that he was not going to go on tour, and he went to England to be with Keith Richards instead. Chris Hillman of the Byrds says that he probably didn't really care about the apartheid, wasn't really doing it as a form of protest. He just wanted to spend time with Keith Richards, which, I mean, I kind of understand, but I'm saying that you're not gonna go because you're protesting apartheid is probably a better reason than saying I'm just going to go hang out with Keith Richards. After he spent some time in England with Keith, he would fly back to California. That's where he felt like he really belonged. That's where he spent most of his time. When he arrived, he sought out his former bandmate from the Byrds, Chris Hillman, to start a new band. This new band would be called the Flying Burrito Brothers. This band would arguably be one of Gram's most successful and influential projects. There were 4 members in the Flying Burrito Brothers originally. It included Gram, Chris Hillman, Sneaky Pete Klenow, I don't know how to say it, and Chris Etheridge. There were other session musicians included, but those 4 men were the main 4. Their first album, The Gilded Palace of Sin, was a turning point in how popular music would change in the early 1970s. This album truly combined country and rock music, creating a sort of cosmic country feeling. The album artwork is also iconic for the suits that they wear on the cover. These are called nudie suits. and they're named so after their creator, Nudie Cone. I can do a whole video on him too. He is a super eccentric guy, but he was very influential in country fashion and made suits for Elvis and Porter Wagner and all kinds of country singers. At this time, Gram had started experimenting with harder drugs, and it had gotten so bad that he was forced to leave the Flying Burrito Brothers after the second album. He floated around for a few years in the early 1970s, playing a variety of gigs with the Rolling Stones and a reunion concert with the Flying Burrito Brothers, until Chris Hillman recommended that he check out an up-and-coming musician named Emmylou Harris. So Gram flew out to Washington, D.C., where she was playing, and he loved her music. He loved her voice. They became very close friends, and she worked on his solo albums with him. They made a couple of albums together with her on backing vocals. Unfortunately, none of these albums were very successful, but they are very good. They have very good music. They include Emmylou in her first singing experience, and Linda Ronstadt is also on the record, which I think is really interesting. Unfortunately, his solo albums weren't successful for him, but it did help to launch Emmylou Harris's career, and she is super successful now. Sadly, at this point, shortly after his first album was released, or right before, Gram passed away on September 19th, 1973, and he was only 26 years old. So, now that we know about Gram's background, let's talk about what led up to his death, and the aftermath. We need to start by talking about Gram's manager, Phil Kaufman. He was very prolific. He managed Gram, but he also managed Frank Zappa, Emmylou Harris, and the Rolling Stones, which is how Gram met Phil Kaufman. Kaufman was introduced to Gram by Keith Richards, and Kaufman agreed to help manage Gram and his band. Kaufman said that he would help Gram stay away from drugs and alcohol, usually hiding the drugs. At one point, a former Byrds band member, Clarence White, passed away, and Gram and Phil Kaufman attended the funeral. According to Kaufman, Gram felt that the Catholic funeral that they had for Clarence White was not something that he would have wanted. So, Kaufman says that Gram told him, "If I die, I want somebody to have a few beers, take me out to the desert, and burn my body." And they shook on it, so it was a deal. The desert that Gram was talking about is called Joshua Tree National Park, which is where he did spend a lot of his free time relaxing. He spent a lot of time here taking psychedelics. Before going back on tour in late 1973, Gram decided he wanted to spend some time out at Joshua Tree. This night, Gram's girlfriend at the time, who was Margaret Fisher, who coincidentally was also his high school sweetheart, Michael Martin, which was Gram's personal assistant, and then Michael's girlfriend, Dale McElroy, went out to the desert on September 17th and planned to stay until the 20th. The night of September 18th, Gram had a ton of alcohol, and he had drugs in his system as well. Gram then decided to purchase morphine from a stranger. We don't know who she was, an unknown woman, who then injected it into him, which caused him to OD at the Joshua Tree Inn, which was right next to Joshua Tree National Park. It's actually still there. Fun fact. The only person that was in the room with him when this happened was his girlfriend, Margaret. And she went and she got Dale McElroy, the other girl. Margaret decided the best way to get him out of his overdose was she would shove ice cubes up his but a coffee, no. Apparently this works sometimes. I don't know. Or at least maybe it's an urban legend. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Anyway, after she did this, she tucked Gram into bed and she went to buy coffee to hopefully help wake him up some more. This was a mistake. This was a bad idea. His breaths became irregular and eventually stopped. And at that point, McElroy started CPR and continued to do it until they finally decided to call 911. Gram was declared dead 15 minutes after midnight on September 19th, 1973, and they listed his cause of death as an OD. So you might be thinking, Vanessa, that is a pretty normal way for a hard-living rock star to die. What makes his death different? Well, it's actually what happened after he passed away that is the crazy part. Do you remember the deal that Gram made with Phil Kaufman? Kaufman was going to make sure that happened no matter what. When Gram passed away, Gram's stepfather had other plans. He had scheduled a private funeral back in New Orleans, which is where he lived at the time, and made it very clear that Gram's music industry friends were not invited. Or at least they weren't invited. I don't know if it was like on purpose, but I'm pretty sure it was. It is said that Bob Parsons, Gram's stepfather, was in line to inherit the estate only if he could prove that Gram was a resident of Louisiana per Louisiana laws. So it's not confirmed, but it's very highly speculated. Kaufman was not going to let this happen. He had to grant Gram's final wishes. He had to make this come true. For some reason, Dale McElroy owned a hearse. I read that she was a socialite, I think. So she had money, and for some reason she had a hearse. She let Kaufman and Martin borrow the hearse, and they took it out to LAX, which is where Gram's body was being held. They were somehow able to convince the airport workers that they worked at a funeral home and that Gram's family had changed their mind and requested that the body be flown from a private plane in the Van Nuys airport. There was also a police officer there, and Kaufman was actually able to get him to help load the body into the hearse. On the way to Joshua Tree National Park, they stopped to get a container of gas, and then they drove out to the desert. When they got to the spot, they brought the coffin out of the hearse and opened it. Apparently it fell out of the hearse, so they had a hard time getting it out. Kaufman poured the gasoline over Gram's body. He lit a match, and he threw it in. So you can imagine what was happening to Gram's body. It was not good. No, there are no pictures. If you're morbidly curious, they don't exist. No videos or anything like that. After they lit the match, they stood there for a little bit. Smoke started going up. Nothing was really happening, so they just left it. They left the coffin and the body in that spot to burn. So, on the way back into LA, apparently there was a lot of traffic. I feel like there's always a lot of traffic in LA. They both had alcohol in their system at this point, and they inevitably hit another car on the freeway and were actually pulled over. When the cop opened the door, beer cans fell out of the car, and he handcuffed Martin and Kaufman together while he went to make sure everyone else involved was okay. For some reason, he didn't take any information down. He didn't even get the license plate. Martin apparently was a very skinny guy, and he was able to slip out of his cuff, and the two men fled. And since there was no way to identify them, they were able to go. They were able to get away. The next morning, at Joshua Tree, some campers saw the smoke from what was burning and alerted authorities, who were led to where the casket and the body was burning. When they found the burnt remains, most of the coffin was completely gone. And of Graham's body, there was 35 pounds of remains left. Even though it was hard to identify Graham, they were able to put the pieces together as a ring he was wearing was still at the site of the body. And at this point, the body had been reported missing, so they were able to connect the dots. Witnesses at the airport and Joshua Tree also reported seeing the hearse that Kaufman and Martin were driving, and they were eventually identified through mugshots and charged with grand theft. What do you think they had to serve? Like, what time do you think they had to serve, or how much of a fine do you think they had to pay? It was a 30-day suspended sentence, $300 each for misdemeanor theft, and $708 for funeral home expenses, aka the coffin. Technically speaking, there is no law against stealing a dead body, at least in California. This was a lot of money back in the day. I mean, it's still a lot of money now to me. I'm poor. I don't have any money. To raise funds to help pay for these fines, Kaufman had a benefit party and gave out beer with Graham's face on it. So, after all of this, what was left of Graham's body was buried outside of New Orleans, which is where it is today. His grave is, I can't remember the town name, but it is like right outside of New Orleans. Technically, as far as a memorial at Joshua Tree goes, there isn't officially a memorial, but fans have made memorials and inscriptions, but they are routinely cleared and moved to the Joshua Tree Inn, and sometimes they aren't returned to the Joshua Tree Inn. The only remaining member of the original Flying Burrito Brothers is Chris Hillman. He did continue the Flying Burrito Brothers with different members, and I'm pretty sure that they're still together today, but without Chris Hillman. Chris Hillman does still make music today. Phil Kaufman is still alive. He is 89, but I was not able to find if he does anything anymore. Emmylou Harris has been extremely successful, like I mentioned earlier. She recorded a couple of albums with Dolly Parton and Linda Ronstadt, and she's very involved in the Country Music Hall of Fame. Graham's little sister, Avis, also passed away in a boating accident. One good thing to come out of all of this is Graham does have a daughter. She's still alive. Her name is Polly Parsons, and she created the Gram Parsons Foundation, where 100% of the proceeds are used to aid musicians in crisis, such as addiction.
For those of you who are experimenting with drugs, please reconsider. Turn to your music, because we need it. Turn to God, because He needs you. Turn to your family. Turn to your friends.
So, all of this to say, even though Graham's life was very short, and it was sad, he's a huge musical influence, not only for me, but for others, and I like that he was authentically himself, and he just did what he wanted to do. I hope that this story inspires you to look into Graham and explore his music. It's really, really good. I like it, even if you don't like country, and I'm not a huge country fan. You can hear the influence that he had on the Eagles. Thank you for watching. I'm excited to post more videos. I'm going to save up to get a camera. I don't really have anywhere to film right now, but it would be nice to have my face attached to the videos. But for now, I hope you enjoy listening, looking at the visuals. Let me know if you have anything that you want me to talk about. Anything music related, music history, interesting facts, stuff like that. I have a lot of scripts written and that I'm working on. Okay, bye.